take a rocket scientist to know that our fiscal situation is a mess, but maybe it takes one to fix it. Former NASA scientist and one of Google's early employees says we do need higher taxes for millionaires, and guess what? He is one himself. Ron Garret joining us straight ahead. All right, so who wants to pay higher taxes? Well, some millionaires actually do, and they've taken their fight to the White House, but the threshold of who should pay is a bit higher than some in D.C. have proposed. Joining us now is Ron Garret, investor and Patriotic Millionaires member. Ron, good to see you. Thanks for coming in. I appreciate it. Well, we'll get to the details in just a second, but I pay 50% of my income in taxes of all kinds. And the word patriotic millionaires kind of bothers me a little bit, and I think does a lot of other people who don't think that they need to pay more than 50%. I don't think I need to pay more than 50% of my income in taxes, but I don't think I'm unpatriotic for thinking that way. Do you?
No, and in fact, that's exactly why we are calling ourselves patriotic, because we are actually paying less than 50% in our taxes. We're probably making more money than you are, and we don't think that's fair.
So isn't the best way to make things more fair the idea that we saw in the Simpson-Bowles report of lowering tax rates and getting rid of the deductions that allow millionaires like you to get away with not paying that much?
Yes, that would be a great step forward.
Okay, but you know that the president is not for that. He is insistent on raising the marginal tax rates.
Yes, and I think that's also a good step forward. It's a very complicated problem. No single measure is going to solve the problem by itself. And so I'm all for closing loopholes. I'm all for raising top marginal rates. I'm especially for capital gains reform, which is one of where the big problems is. And there are a whole bunch of other things that I would do if I were king of the world. But this is the one thing that I can step up to the plate and do my part.
Now, you and I could argue because various points of the law, et cetera, but there is one point I think that you may be getting somewhere, and that perhaps the president and the Republicans could get somewhere in a compromise. The folks, and I know you weren't at the White House for this meeting, but at that meeting last week, there was a letter presented to the president. I want to read part of that letter because it seems to me to be a shift in thinking about all this. It says, we ask that you increase taxes on incomes over $1 million. We make this request as loyal citizens who now or in the past earn an income of $1 million per year or more. So your letter, or this letter from your fellows in the Patriotic Millionaires, would exempt the first $1 million from a tax increase. Are you okay with that?
Yes. One of the big debating points is where you draw the line between who's rich and who's not. And I don't really have a strong personal position on that. It's probably somewhere north of $250,000, but by the time you get to $1 million a year, I think everybody would agree you're rich.
Okay, now you're a scientist, you know numbers. The president says that this is all about math, but let's just do some of the math here, because if the president gets everything he wants, if he gets all the taxes raised to the amount that he wants, that'll increase revenues to $82 billion a year. Now, the deficit for the past 4 years has been over $1 trillion. That's only 8%. Where does the other 92% of the money to pay for this increased spending we've had over the past 4 years come from?
Well, we have to tackle this problem one step at a time. And just because taking a measure is not going to solve the whole problem is not a reason not to do it. But there are other things that I would look at as increasing corporate taxes. If it were up to me, I would like to cut defense. I would like to see some entitlement reform. I am, for example, I support means testing for Social Security, which gets me in trouble with some of my liberal friends.
Right. Well, that's it. The 92% cannot be avoided. I mean, the fact is that raising taxes, the one way in which you can get a lot of extra income is by growing the economy. That's when we're talking about increased revenues of hundreds of billions of dollars. And the thing that worries me most about the idea of raising tax rates right now, when we're sort of on the precipice, is that we may slow the economy even more than it already is, and that would mean less revenues, not more.
Yeah, so this is another one of these very complicated issues, but there is this myth that raising taxes on rich people is a jobs killer. It's simply not true. If you go and look at the historical data, the periods where the United States has been at its most prosperous has almost exactly coincided with the periods when the top marginal tax rates have been the highest. The 30 years after World War II, top marginal rates were never below 70%, and they were as high as 90%.
Okay, but Ron, you and I know that economists, it depends on which number of years, which grouping of years you use. I mean, I could point out to you that in the 1920s they lowered tax rates, we had a boom. In the 1960s they lowered tax rates, we had a boom. In the 1980s they lowered tax rates, we had a boom. So the opposite case can be made depending on what era you're looking at.
We have a boom that's followed by a really big bust. So what happens?
It wasn't a really big. Hold on, it wasn't a really. That's not true. It wasn't the boom period in the 1980s from 1983 until 1990. It's true there was a recession, but we were out of the recession at the time of the election in 1992. So it wasn't a huge bust.
These processes play themselves out over long periods of time. The Great Depression was a really big bust. 2000, the housing crash was a really big bust, and it would have been bigger if not for heroic efforts by the government to stave off catastrophe.
All right. All right. Well, listen, the one thing that I think we may have made a little progress on is at least moving that mark from 250,000 up to 1 million. That may be a little bit of an area where there could be compromise. Ron, it's a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much for coming in. Ron Garret, investor in Patriotic Millionaire. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ron.
Smart guys from